When you look at the sheer tribalism, you know, like I mentioned, and many people have mentioned, Joe Biden seems to only be talking to one side of the country at this point, because they've basically resigned themselves. Okay, we can't win them over. It's over. We're done talking. I mean, the tribalism has reached absolutely absurd levels. You know, it's like that right now that people are circulating these old tweets from 2020 of Kamala Harris and like Daily Kos writing about vaccine skepticism. And they're saying like, who would take Trump's vaccine? And now they're the ones screaming like, why won't Trump supporters take the vaccine?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, people are absolutely aligned. I got to say, you know, perhaps I'm just biased, but I think it is fair to say that it is the rule for the establishment left, but the exception for the right in general. So leftists kind of overlap with a lot of the establishment Democrats, but you look at, you mentioned the Republican Party and their, you know, forever war kind of stuff too.
I want to make clear that I don't think that's just the Republicans. I mean, both parties love the forever war.
But I will say, like, I think as another sign of the collapse or the decay or the change, whatever you want to call it, is Donald Trump's storming into the Republican Party and forcing dramatic changes.
Right. And
Trump supporters,
he couldn't have done that in 1980 or 1984. Right. You can't, one man with a bunch of bombast can't knock over a healthy system.
But the Trump supporters, I don't know if did you hear what Michael Moore said back in 2016?
I think I did. I remember being shocked that he was sort of intellectually honest about it. For the first time, I had some respect for him.
It was brilliant. He basically said that Trump was one of the only people advocating for these factories. He goes to these auto manufacturers and said, I will tariff you 30% if you try and move these cars out of America. And then Michael Moore said, the workers look at Donald Trump like a human Molotov cocktail, and they are going to send the biggest F you to the establishment the world has ever heard, and they are going to enjoy it. The one thing he got wrong was he was like, it'll feel good for a week or a month.
That felt good
maybe
for 4 years.
I know, yeah, it felt good for a lot of people for a while. So I think that's one of the big changes to the Republican Party. But I think, you know, so just to address that point, on the left, you have many people who are, it's crazy how they can't remember what they said last year.
You know, I started flipping back through 1984 recently, and everyone's read 1984. And there's a problem with reading things. You tend to boil them down to an essence or a logo or something. And things in the world, books, novels, people, have a whole lot of complexity. So to actually go back and look at 1984, it's not just sort of a stand-in or a stereotype or a glyph that stands for repressive totalitarianism. There's a lot of detail there. And the detail about how the party just changes the line and everyone, you know, switches on a dime. And this is what we're seeing. You know, last year, you know, I was one of these internet autists who was paying attention to China in very, very early January. And I think it was late January when, you know, I started tweeting to my 10,000, you know, I'm talking to Tim Pool about, I've got 10,000 followers on Twitter. But I said, you know, guys, now is the time to start stockpiling stuff. And people said, you know what? And I said, you know, I don't know that, you know, if it's surfaces, but start getting latex gloves in case it does turn out to be surfaces. I don't know if it's airborne, but definitely start getting masks, you know, P90, P95. Start laying in food. I'm not saying there will be supply chain disruptions, but when you don't know. And at that time, the left and, oh gosh, what was he? Ezra
Klein?
Yes, thank you. I think it was either Ezra Klein, or if it wasn't Ezra Klein, it was one of the other Ezra Kleins, was absolutely poo-pooing this idea of, you know, masks do nothing, and even if they do anything, you should leave it for the professionals. There's no reason to have a mask, and the fear that you'll generate, that's the real danger. And then they all pivot on a dime when, you know, the new line comes down from the, you know, there used to be Journalist, if you're familiar with that, you know, 10 or whatever.
The Journalist.
The Journalist.
Oh, yeah, there's more than people know, man.
Right, and so certainly there are dozens more journalists, and when you see...
let's break that down real quick.
Sure.
He's not saying journalist, he's saying journo-list. This was, I think Ezra Klein made this, right?
I believe so.
It was a Facebook group where all of these different journalists from different organizations were on one community group together. So one person would come in and say, X happened, and then every single journalist would, you know, in this group would see it. So they were all wrapped up in the exact same bubble narrative, completely oblivious to the outside world.
There's a wonderful video on YouTube that shows some people on a cable channel reading out a prepared statement, and like every 5 seconds it switches to a different cable channel and the statement continues seamlessly, because this was literally a memo that came down from corporate and they wanted every local affiliate to do it. Journalist was effectively the same thing, but there wasn't a corporation at the top. There was just this little clade or file or hive of journalists, and they had tomorrow's bullet points every day.
What people don't realize about that is there wasn't one journo list. there was probably 10,000.
Right.
I was personally on several of them.
Yeah, I think I still am on one.
I was on. There were a bunch of different ones. There was one that was about. It was like citizen journalist centric. So it was basically 10 or 20,000 people, with several who were very active and many who just followed. And they would post things, and they would all see it. And then, sure enough, these articles pop up everywhere. But I do want to, with that being said, go back to the point you were making about, it's time to prepare, it's time to buy supplies, because early on last year, we have one of the sponsors we often do is for a food bucket.
Awesome.
Safe and ready meals. This is not, I'm not promoting them. I'm just mentioning that we have promoted them in the past. And this is like a 25-year food bucket. Now, I don't like doing promos, like legit people, like I'll get sent like, hey, Tim, would you want to advertise for this? And I'm like, no, I can't do that company. Like I have to actually think there's utility there. And so this company I thought was actually fantastic because the way I describe it to people is, you've got a first aid kit, right?
I've got multiple first aid kits.
How many?
But
I don't know, 4 or 5, including trauma bandages. I go into that in my books in that, I've got a small first aid kit in my workshop. I've got a beefier first aid kit in my chainsaw supplies.
Yeah.
all right, now here's a question though.
Sure.
How often do you use them?
There's sort of the 80-20 rule or the power law in that, I probably cut my fingertips or something every, 2 weeks or so. I think I actually did it.
Once every 2 weeks?
Yeah.
You might need a bandage.
Right. But
How often do you eat food?
Right. Yeah. 3
I think
times
you
a
eat
day.
food, yes, 3
Yeah.
times a day. And so it's crazy to me that, that there's this negative connotation, this negative perspective on having emergency food or whatever. And I'm like, you should have a thing of water, food, and a first aid kit. And you look at what happened there was around the time, I can't remember, actually I don't remember when this was. There was flooding in Houston. Do you remember? It was really,
Absolutely.
really bad. And I'm like, some of these people are like trapped in their houses for a long period of time. You're going to be happy you can crack open that freeze-dried sealed bag, and now you're going to need some power to boil the water and stuff like that, But I look at it like, it was strange to me that the establishment doesn't prepare for anything.
Right.
You mentioned they turn on a dime. The party says, so be it, and they all just agree. And they're all in this mentality that no matter what happens, they will always be safe. And that to me is insane.
Absolutely.
Look, you know what I think? Here's what I always say about buying beans and rice or these emergency food kits. If you're in your absolute worst case scenario, okay, admittedly, your worst case scenario, you have food, right? But in the absolute best case scenario, you literally, you just eat it.
Yeah.
Like I used to say, look, worst case scenario, just eat the food, right? And then I realized, no, the worst case scenario would be the actual apocalypse, and then you'll eat the food.
Right.
But if you buy these things and then nothing happens, the other day I just cracked it open and made some stroganoff. It was delicious. Put some chicken in there and some spices.
And I've absolutely done the same thing. Not recently, but I've had a pile, one or 2 boxes of MREs sitting around the house forever since shortly after I got out of college. And every now and then you'd be sort of working late, and suddenly it's 10 o'clock, and there's no food in the fridge, and there's no takeout. I've eaten an MRE at 10:30 in the evening more than once. So.
Yeah. It's not something you want to eat all the time, but
Right.
they're not bad.
Yeah, it's good self-limiting in that way. You're never going to be tempted to eat up all of your
Yeah.
MREs.
But let's talk about this. Right now, you mentioned in the previous segment that we could be coming to this 500-year end cycle. I mean,
Yep.
you've heard of the fourth turning. I imagine.
Yep.
Thucydides' trap, and now we've got that MIT study that everyone's talking about. 2040, the collapse is coming, or whatever.
There's yet another one. I'm going to mispronounce the word, but it's like Korolev wave theory. And
we should add it to the list. We can talk about that one.
I think I ended up picking this up from an interstitial essay in a book of John Barnes' short stories like 30 years ago. And the idea is that there's a bunch of different waves, sort of sinusoids, and some have 4-year cycles, another 12. And, at some point, if you've ever, taken calculus or done a Fourier, decomposition of something, you get a whole bunch of curves, and they start to peak up at certain points. And, the theory is that all of these curves are going to peak, sometime way off in the far future, like 2025 or something. And this theory is written down in the 70s or 80s. And I think we're seeing a lot of it come true. Stuff is getting crazy.
So do you think, you mentioned last year you said people should buy stuff.
Yeah.
What would you say right now? Do you think people should be stocking up or something like that?
Let me back
I
up
always
a
wanna
little bit and say,
avoid panic, right?
Yeah. Panic never helps anything. I think that anti-fragility is a good thing, and sort of the
Yes.
Nassim Taleb
Love that
thing.
idea.
And so, people ask, are you a prepper? I'm like, well, I'm not prepared to survive the zombie apocalypse. I don't want to survive a nuclear war.
You don't want to.
I'm saying maybe for humor. I'd rather not die if there is a nuclear war. But the point is, all sorts of things happen, and it's always better to be prepared for them. One thing I talk about, this isn't a survivalist or a prepper book, and I've got some sort of anti-prepping thoughts.
And that's
almost.
Escape from the City.
Right, Escape from the City. And this is a recent homesteading book that I wrote. I've been on the homestead for 8 years, and there's 2 volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2.
Wow.
And it's basically one long book, about 1,300 pages long.
Wow.
And and it's sort of massive in the amount of detail inside.
Cool.
The table of contents alone is 30 pages. So if you've got any interest in homesteading or prepping, I'd recommend picking it up. It's Escape the City. It's on Amazon, and you can just Google it.
They made prepping a dirty word.
Yeah. The problem with anything is that it gets an ideological stink. And so there's always this constant recycling of language, whether it's the name for a minority or, intellectually challenged person or a hobby, and so, prepping, there's always an impetus in the media to find someone and point at them and laugh, and then everyone laughs along with you. And, sort of the journalist goes out that we all agree as a society that, preppers or furries or whatever, we can punch down at them because they're a bunch of weirdos in the same way that we're punching down at people who are buying masks last January. So anyway, my thoughts about prepping are there's a power law in that absolute huge catastrophic things happen very, very rarely, but sort of very small annoyances happen more often. So if someone says, I want to be prepared, what should I do? Should I get a Zombie Hunter Extreme machete? Should I get a long-range sniper rifle? I'm like, maybe you should get $500 in the checking account because people get laid off like once every 5 years. So you're going to be laid off from your job, in the next 5 years, certainly in the next 10 years. So lock down how you're going to survive that without, losing your lifestyle. People lose their power once every 10 or 15 years. Plan for that. And that's not expensive. You get a $500 generator, a $300 transfer switch. But then you keep going out on these things, and they're less and less frequent. But the chance, hopefully we'll all live to be 70 or 80 or 90. And a thing that only happens once every 15 years, that's going to happen to you several times in your life. And we in the West, we've been, rich and protected by oceans. And so we've been very, blessed, and we've not had a lot of the bad stuff that normal people have at the same rate that they have it. But I wrote this book starting several years ago, and one thing I said is, hey, we get plagues about once every 100 years. We had the Spanish flu in 1918, and I went back several other plagues. So you should be prepared because there's a decent chance that there'll be a plague in your lifetime.
Did you hear about this? This story happened several years ago. There was an algal bloom in the Great Lakes, and within 40, which is Toledo on the lake? I can't remember which city it was.
Like Western Ohio,
but is on one of the Great Lakes.
Cleveland's on the lake.
Cleveland,
Sandusky's on the lake.
There was within 40 miles, I guess, of all these cities, no drinking water.
Wow.
Because what happened was, as soon as the news broke, as soon as people found out, they immediately started raiding local stores for bottled water and moving further and further out to get more and more water. And then within 40 miles, no water. What do you drink?
My wife made a really interesting point that one of the reasons to prep is not because it's the only way to get the supplies. The reason to prep is so that you don't have to make terrible trade-offs when you need the supplies. And, the terrible trade-off could be as simple as paying $10 a gallon for gasoline to run your generator, or it could be a lot worse. And I mean, people, especially women in refugee camps, all the time have to make terrible trade-offs.
I went crazy with vinegar and salt. And people are laughing. And honey, like 100 pounds of honey. Because if it does go down, I want to provide it for the neighbors. I want the entire community to be preserved as much as possible so that we can barter. So that if they have all the ammo, if they have, whatever, we can all kind of come together. And those things become extremely valuable.
Ian bought an absurd amount of salt, vinegar, and honey.
Never go bad.
Yep. And we laugh mostly at the vinegar. Most of the vinegar. Because, I don't know what you do with it. However, I do understand it can be used for a lot of chemical processes. So it's a funny idea that you'd have so much vinegar because how often do you really use it in some recipes? But in actuality, it lasts forever, doesn't it?
As far as I know, yeah.
It does, and I'm going to jump in and defend Ian because when you've got vinegar, you can pickle anything.
That's
so
true.
when your harvest comes in all over 4 weeks, but you want to store it for the winter, just pile that under vinegar. And
is that all you do? You just put vinegar?
Yeah.
I thought you needed brine.
Brine is salt, so Ian's covered there as
no,
well.
exactly. I mean, honey never goes bad.
Right.
Salt
Crystallizes.
Salt is you definitely need salt.
Doesn't really go bad,
where would you get your salt in your diet if you're in an area like this, in Appalachia?
Yeah.
Is salt naturally occurring or what?
if there was a disaster or something and you had to improvise, I would go with road salt. But other than that, you're going to be trading people who are, bringing in salt from the ocean.
Salt was the currency at one point 5,000-6,000 years ago.
I was thinking about this earlier because we bought some deer salt licks.
Oh, yeah.
You just, chuck them out, put a leaf on them or something. And I see the deer's going nuts because there's no salt.
Right.
And so the deer, when they find salt, there's a warning on it saying, make sure you put out several, otherwise the deer will fight each other to get it because there's no salt. So imagine if you didn't have salt.
Yep.
See, this is the crazy thing. People don't realize. In even, we get out of the city. We're in the middle of nowhere. People still don't realize that we're dependent on so much. Like vitamin C, for instance. I don't know where we would source vitamin C out here. We could probably try and grow some stuff. Maybe because we're more modernized, we can grow stuff indoors and try and grow some citrus or something. But where would we get vitamin C? What's your recommendation on that?
For that, again, I'm not a super prepper, but rose hips have vitamin C, and we've got roses in the yard. So,
got wild roses here.
Yeah.
Just eat a bunch of roses.
Yeah.
Wow.
Boil it into tea.
Yep.
That'd
Absolutely.
be a good way to do it. Can you boil grass? Can you work with grass for food? I know you can't eat it directly because of the excessive cellulose.
Yeah, I don't think there's many calories in grass. I would feed grass to my sheep and then eat the sheep. So
that'd work. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to do it. Chickens eat grass.
Yes, they do.
But they can't subsist off of grass, right?
Chickens will get a lot of their calories from bugs and worms.
Yeah.
And so we've got our chickens in a pen, but there's a thing that a lot of people do, which is a chicken tractor, and that has nothing to do with a diesel-powered tractor. It's basically a mobile pen with wheels on it. And the idea is that you put your chickens in this pen, and then you just go out and either with your riding mower or your tractor or just by hand, you move it 10 or 15 feet a day.
Chicken City on wheels.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, people have recommended it, and I've heard that people will put it over where they want to farm.
Right.
Let the chickens tear it up, then move it, and then you can plant stuff in it, and they fertilize it.
So I've got a thought about this, and this is something I go into my book. There's some utility in this. Chickens are great. Pigs are great. I don't have pigs this year, but in general, I have pigs like every other year. But people sometimes want to say, oh, man, and this is sort of like after a deep bong hit, the system, nature gives you everything you need, man. The pigs will furrow, they'll turn up the soil for you so you don't need to till. And there's a little bit of truth here, but there's a whole lot more wishful thinking. And I've never seen anyone who says that pigs will till your soil who actually have their own pigs. It's to some degree wishful thinking.
So the pigs are no good.
Pigs are great, but pigs do not replace tractors or rototillers or plows.
Yeah. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.